Louisiana mother has been indicted for the murder of her 8-month-old son. Police say the infant suffered extensive injuries, including multiple broken bones and several healing fractures. He was airlifted to Children's Hospital in New Orleans, but tragically he died shortly after arriving. Now, a grand jury has formally indicted the boy's mother on a charge of first-degree murder. Thank you for watching. I'm Kennedi Walker, and I'll walk you through the tragic details and where the case stands now. You're watching Law and Crime. A grand jury has indicted 25-year-old Autumn Harper for the murder of her 8-month-old son, Sterling. Authorities say Harper repeatedly abused her child, resulting in injuries that ultimately led to his death. Back in March, Harper reportedly dropped Sterling off with a babysitter. A GoFundMe page created by Sterling's great-grandparents claims the baby began vomiting and eventually stopped breathing. The sitter reportedly performed CPR and rushed the baby to Riverside Medical Center in Franklinton, Louisiana. Police were called to the hospital for reports of an infant in distress. Sterling was later airlifted to Children's Hospital in New Orleans, but tragically he died less than a week later. The Franklinton police chief says an autopsy revealed multiple healing fractures to Sterling's ribs, arms, legs, and even his skull. His family says injuries also extended to his ankles and knees. During police questioning, Harper allegedly admitted to abusing her son. Her mother spoke with WDSU and said Harper had allegedly admitted to small things, including putting her hand over Sterling's mouth, possibly to stop him from crying. She also said that her daughter had shown signs of struggling with her mental health. But on social media, a different picture emerged. Harper's Facebook page is filled with images of her and Sterling, along with pregnancy updates that painted the image of a proud, loving mother. Now, Autumn Harper is behind bars, awaiting a potential trial for first-degree murder. And here to break down this story with me is family law attorney and trial professor at Emory Law School, Randy Kessler. Randy, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks, Kennedy. Glad to be here.
So let's just jump right in. What makes a grand jury pursue first-degree charges in a case like this? And what does that suggest about just how prosecutors are framing this from the start?
Well, that's about as bad as it gets, right? And, obviously there's a mental component to it. That's not the grand jury's problem. That's the defense lawyer's problem. So a lot of people out there are thinking there must be something wrong with this woman. Why is she being charged so high? Hey, there's the facts, the crime, aggravation, the factor that it was a child, an innocent, about as young as you can possibly get. There's no way she gets anything less than that. And the grand jury, that's their job. They tell the judge and they tell the state, this is what we're going to do. This is what we want you to proceed on. And then it's up to the prosecutor to either prove it or cut a deal, or the defense lawyer to say, hey, I'm going to give my best shot. And there's going to be a mental health defense. There has to be.
Absolutely. And we'll dive into that in a moment. But I'm just wondering, now that she's been indicted for first-degree murder, does that legally put the death penalty on the table since it's Louisiana?
If it's, honestly, I don't know if they have it in Louisiana. I think they do. I think they still have it in Louisiana. If so, then it would certainly be on the table. I can't imagine, a crime other than this that would be more deserving of the death penalty.
How would they go about that? Is that the grand jury? Does the grand jury have to indict on that? Is that a different charge? Would the judge have to choose that?
Same charge. It's up, the prosecution has to decide what do they want to put on the table, because sometimes when you say it's a death penalty case and you're the prosecutor, maybe the jury's not so interested in convicting a mother that's got some mental deficiencies, and maybe they find a way around it, because who wants to be the person that causes somebody to die? So that's the real dilemma. It's really not a question of does she deserve the death penalty. I think, most people would say if anyone deserves it, she does. Then it's a personal choice. How do we feel about the death penalty? You could think of the worst possible crime. There's some people that still don't think that we kill another human being no matter what they've done. So that's a separate issue. But this crime merits, in my opinion, seeking the death penalty. The real question is going to be, does a jury of 12 all agree that she should be put to death? And does the prosecution decide that they want to take that off the table to guarantee they get a conviction? It's much easier to get a conviction when 12 people on the jury know that by finding this person guilty, they're not potentially going to be the cause of this person dying.
Right. And just getting into the details of the case, how significant is it that many of Sterling's injuries were healing, according to police?
Well, it's significant because it happened. It wasn't like it happened and immediately she went to the police. It happened and there was some healing. and then they discover this. The fact that injuries heal, oh, the poor child. If they were healing, it means the child lived through some serious pain.
Could prosecutors argue that those healing injuries, establish a timeline of harm? And if so, just how might that affect sentencing or aggravating factors?
It's exactly that. It's an aggravating factor. Those kind of things. It's not just a one time, gun to the head. That's it. Death occurs. Now, to me, a bullet to the head or a long, slow, agonizing death both probably warrant the death penalty if it was, someone who did that to my child. But they are aggravating factors, all sorts of aggravating factors, and that's multiple injuries, long-term pain, dragging something out like that. They're all things that are going to make the jury hate her even more and make the prosecution seek the worst possible penalty that they can get, which is the death penalty.
Right. Well, police they do allege that the suspect she confessed. If she did confess to abusing her son, why does this case still require a full trial? I know some people are asking that. Couldn't this be resolved through a plea, or why might the state want to avoid that?
Well, I don't know what the confession said. The confession, I think, from what I can gather, was that she hurt her child. But, did she cause the death? What was her condition? Why did she hurt her child? Was she under some influence of something? Was it a mental illness? So there are a lot of defenses to it. It's not black and white. And certainly, you want to have a process. She's got to get a lawyer. The lawyers are going to talk to the prosecution, and they're going to do everything they can to keep her out of court, right? They're going to try to say she needs mental health. Let's put her in a hospital, and probably what they're going to do is say she's not capable of standing trial because she can't assist her own lawyer, because right now she's still under this mental deficiency. So it's not as easy as one, two, three. Hey, I did it. I shot my kid. Put me to death. Even when you're going to do something like that, there's still an argument about the death penalty. Even if she pled guilty to this, there's still a sentencing phase, and you can still argue about whether she deserves to be put to death or life in prison or some other alternative mental treatment, some other facility. So it's never as easy as, hey, I did it, put me to death.
Well, given that this case isn't as black and white as others that we may have seen, I mean, what leverage does the prosecution have by holding firm on first degree charges? Is it a strategy to force a plea?
Yes, and also I want to go back for a minute, Kennedy, that even when we have confessions, sometimes the confessions, if you have someone with a mental deficiency, sometimes confessions are wrong. We've seen people confess to crimes they didn't do. I'm not suggesting she didn't do this, but maybe she overconfessed. Maybe she talked about things that she didn't even do. So we have to get across that hurdle, first of all. Then, as far as the prosecution, they're going to charge as much as they can. But, we see a lot in the news now about overcharging. We see P. Diddy, and did the prosecution overcharge? And the jury just said, well, they're putting too much on this guy. So in this case, I think they have an easy case. They've got a confession or a partial confession. They've got a very, very, very sympathetic victim. The hardest part of it is that it's a mother and her own child. And it's really hard for jurors to think, why would a mother do that to their own child unless there was some intervening factor, some mental deficiency, some gun to her head, figuratively or literally, by somebody else, that if you don't do this, then you're going to die. There's got to be an explanation. This is not a stranger on stranger. Someone's committing a crime. They came into a house. They were just shooting up the house, and they happened to shoot an innocent bystander. This is a mother killing her own child. That's the only thing that she has going for her, which is to say to the jury, look, obviously there was something wrong with my client. Why would a mother kill their own child? That's the only thing they have.
Well, in cases like this, what kinds of mental health disorders or untreated trauma do you often see emerge during trial? And how seriously are they taken by judges and juries, right? Because it isn't just as simple as saying, oh, she just is mental health. Like there's a whole process, correct?
Right. It'll be a battle of the experts. She'll have her own expert saying that she didn't understand what she was doing. She didn't understand right from wrong. She didn't have what we call a lucid interval, because you can have people with mental illnesses that are rational and sane for a brief period of time and then commit crimes while they're sane. But if she was not capable of understanding right from wrong, if she was delusional, if she was, in some sort of hallucinatory state when she did it, then maybe she didn't know what she was doing and didn't know the consequences. Because what we all know, that in criminal law, to be guilty of a crime, you must have intent, mens rea. You have to intend to commit the crime or intend to commit the act that results in the death. And that's going to have to be her argument, that she had no intention. She was seeing figurines, or she was seeing dancing babies, and she just thought that she was going crazy and tried to figure it out. I don't know what the defense is going to be, but there are defenses like that to show that she did not have the intent to kill her own child.
Is there a psychological difference between someone harming a child out of loss of control versus calculated abuse over time? Because according to police, I mean, again, what we talked about with those healing bones.
Yeah, I think that might hurt her case, right? If she's had this kind of issue over time, she should have at least gotten help. If she's caused harm to her child, and then she had, again, what we call lucid intervals or periods of rationality, and she was functioning in society, then she would see what she had done to her child, even if it was in a mental, weird kind of state. She should have gotten help. And the fact that she didn't, that's an aggravating factor. And she might be charged with more than just murder. It might be charged with child abuse over time and murder, just in case they don't get her on the murder. She certainly abused the child before, and that's why the healing is important.
Could her social media, showing affection and pride in her pregnancy and her son, end up being used against her in court to challenge any potential claims of mental instability?
I think so. If she's got normal posts that show I'm a normal person, I'm a proud mom, I'm happy to share pictures of me and my child, I think that goes against a defense saying she never knew what she was doing. She was always off the deep end. A mental a mental health defense is about the most difficult there is because you could argue anybody who kills somebody has something wrong mentally, right? Anybody who does an intentional act of murder is not, so it's very hard to convince a jury. And they're probably going to first try to convince the judge and say, Judge, she's not even fit to stand trial. But again, they're going to have some expert come in and really evaluate her, meet with her, do some significant testing. And I'm sure the state's going to oppose it.
The baby was only 8 months old. I mean, could a diagnosis like postpartum psychosis apply in this case?
Whew. That's a tough one. There's postpartum, but postpartum to the extent that you kill your own child, that's going to be a real reach. It's going to be a tough one. It's going to minimize the people that really do have postpartum and that deal with it and struggle with it, but they don't kill their child. So I think postpartum defense on its own is not enough. You're going to have to show some serious mental deficiency by a really esteemed psychologist that knows what the heck they're talking about.
Why is it that just so many child abuse cases only come to light after a tragedy? I mean, are there systemic blind spots that allow this to happen even when families are known to be struggling?
Absolutely, and we're all there, right? You hear that a mother's ugly to her child. How many people step up, even in a supermarket? You hear someone yelling at their child. I bet if you had 10 people sitting around watching a mother yell at their child, one or two of them might step in. But, that's part of the problem with society. Someone saw something, someone didn't report it. We also don't want to get in each other's business. Maybe the child fell, maybe the child's got a hurt arm because the child had an accident, fell out of the crib or whatever it was. People are hesitant to be the first to report. And that's a problem with children because children can't speak for themselves. As far as the police, I don't know what they could have done. They didn't see anything. Nobody called them. No neighbor alerted them. That's what the investigation is going to reveal. Were there outcries? Were there people? And maybe there's someone that should have known better. And maybe there was someone else involved. Maybe there's someone else and there was turmoil and there was a fight and the child was a bystander. We don't know all the facts yet. This is brand new.
Do you think cases like Sterling's put enough pressure on state and local agencies to maybe rethink how they screen and intervene with at risk mothers?
Sure. All the sunlight we can shed on this, all the disinfectant, they say sunlight's the best disinfectant. Nobody wants to be working for a Department of Family and Children's Services and see a case like this. This is what they do to prevent stuff like this. That's their entire job. And that's why they take it seriously. We see people all the time that call us and say, they came and took my kids and I didn't do anything wrong. My child fell and hit their head and they had a scar or a bruise. Well, this is why the state steps in. And sometimes they overreach. Sometimes you take children away from innocent parents until you figure out that nothing really bad happened. And there's some trauma there because a child was removed from their parents. But the flip side is maybe you're preventing something like this. And that's why you see this tension between protecting children and interfering in a family relationship where people sometimes have done nothing wrong. We err on the side of protecting children. We just don't do it enough.
And just going back to the details of this case, I mean, what's the significance of the autopsy report or of the autopsy report in cases involving infants, especially in proving intent and not just harm?
Well, you can see if it's an accident. You can see, multiple injuries. Sometimes when somebody, you know, one accident, one injury will have one broken bone, but multiple fractures and bruises all over the body shows, I mean, this child didn't have a chance. When you have an 8-month old who's got a broken bone, that's enough. You take the child to the hospital. You don't sit there and wait for another injury to happen. So there's certainly not an accident or misfortune that befell this child if there's this many injuries. That's why autopsies are important. They can also tell what kind of instruments were used. Was it bare hands? Was it a hammer? Was it a blunt object? Did the child fall and hit their head? Autopsies are important to see sort of what really happened in the last moments of this child's life.
How could the defense, I mean, begin to argue this case? I mean, could they potentially say something along the lines of the mom didn't know that the bones were broken? Because if you have a 8-year old instead of an 8-month old, maybe they can tell you what exactly hurts, but a baby is crying. Maybe the mom thought the baby was crying for something else. I mean, how does the defense start to do their job?
It's going to be really hard, right? First of all, there's no victim blaming. There's no, this victim was in the wrong place at the wrong time. This victim was 100% innocent. No fault, no culpability, no partial blame on the victim. So they don't have any of that for their defense. The next step is children can't really, speak for themselves. That's a mother's duty. That's a parent's duty. Is even if the child didn't have visible injuries, you're a mom, you know when your child's suffering. And this child, apparently, it wasn't a close call. This wasn't a stomach ache. This wasn't a child whose elbow hurt. This was a child who had multiple injuries. This mother knew this child was suffering and was going to die. I think the defense has a really hard uphill battle. And that's why they've got to try to put her in a mental institution if they want to save her life. That's about the only way I see her not getting the death penalty, or at a minimum, life in jail with no parole.
What happens next procedurally, and what key decisions will prosecutors and defense attorneys be making in the coming weeks that we should be watching for?
Well, they're going to see if there's going to be a mental health evaluation, a psychological evaluation to determine her fitness to stand trial. And then they're going to schedule a trial date. There's not really a lot of witness gathering, especially if there's a confession. The defense may want some more time to try to develop other strategies, or in some cases, they ask for a speedy trial before the state can gather their evidence. But really, what evidence is there? They've got the DNA that, is there anybody else that was around? They're trying to exclude any other witnesses. That would be for the defense to say maybe there's somebody else that should share the blame. If there was somebody else, if there was a co-conspirator, then it's on mom right now, immediately, to drop her guard and speak the truth and tell everybody what's happening. That's her only chance of salvation. If that happens, then it's going to be delayed and there's going to be a little bit more of an investigation. We haven't heard anything about that. Until we hear otherwise, I expect it's going to proceed to trial. And I expect, usually in a case like this, you'd plead guilty if they take the death penalty off the table. But this woman may say, you know what? If they put me to death, that's probably, better than spending the rest of my life in jail. There are people who would rather take their chance and say, no jury's going to convict me of killing my own child. But um, I would not be surprised if there was a plea to life without parole. If it saves her life, if it saves the state a lot of money for trying the case, and it brings closure to all the other family members who lost this child.
Right, because I'm just trying to imagine, when the jury sees the pictures of the little boy, when they see the boy's injuries. Well, yes, of course, who wants to send a mother to death? But I mean, how do they not? How do they, just look at this case and not have any bias with the case as just so emotional?
So that's when a lawyer, a defense lawyer, can win a case on voir dire, right? Voir dire is a process by which you pick a jury. And if you can find someone to put on the jury that has religious beliefs or strong held beliefs against the death penalty, they shouldn't be allowed to sit on a death penalty jury if the judge finds out that they would not, even contemplate doing that. But if you can find somebody that might feel like, I really wouldn't do that unless it was a mass murderer or a serial killer, and I couldn't do that. You get somebody that's sympathetic like that. Doesn't matter what the facts are. There are some people in this world that would never say, I vote for the death penalty, no matter what the crime was. And if you can get one like that on the jury, then you're not going to get a death penalty.
The suspect's mother says that she allegedly admitted to covering the baby's mouth when he cried. Does that admission fall into the legal gray area of neglect, or is it something much more intentional?
Well, I think combined with all the other facts, his mother was neglectful. I don't think there's a question about that. That's going to be a lesser included offense. She's going to be convicted of a whole bunch of stuff. But the real question is first degree murder with the consequence of the death penalty is the one she's fighting. But yeah, covering the child's mouth, it also shows that this wasn't a one time loss of consciousness. She had a mental episode. She's had a history of doing bad things. And even if she was mentally incompetent each time she did it, when she wasn't mentally incompetent, when she was doing something that was stable, she should have said, oh my God, what have I done to this child? I've got to figure out how to fix this and stop myself. We've all seen movies where, the crazy person says, stop, no, don't make me do this. They speak to the voices in their head. There had to be a moment over time where she said, something's wrong. I've got to fix this. I'm this child's mother, and she didn't do that. That's going to hurt her on top of just killing the child, not fixing it, especially when she'd done things before, like covering her child's mouth and hurting the child in other ways.
For any parents or caregivers who are watching and struggling silently, what warning signs should they take, or what warning signs should they just not ignore themselves?
Trust your gut instinct. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? You're going to falsely accuse somebody of hurting their child, and they're going to hate you for it. You say, I saw this story that Kennedi covered, and it scared me to my core, and I swore to myself that if I ever saw something, I would report it. And if I'm wrong, I'm sorry. I can live with the consequences of being wrong. I can't live with the consequences of not having done something and a child dying. Think like that, and the world might be a little bit better, a little bit safer for children.
But for those, that the parent themselves, that maybe they are having those mental issues like we were talking about, and maybe they're
Get help.
thinking about hurting their child, I mean, what would you suggest to them?
Get help. It's therapy is a wonderful thing. There's nothing wrong with seeing somebody and figuring out it's good for your child. It's good for you. You want to thrive in this world. You want your children to thrive. If you're not right, there are so many resources out there, and now with Google and cell phones and 911, call somebody, just reach out, call a friend, call your pastor, call 911. If you know you have issues like this, get help. It's much better than going to jail for the rest of your life, losing a child, or facing the death penalty. You might have to go into an institution for 30 days until they help you recover. Those are all better options than this case.
Right. And finally, I mean, just how do you seek justice in a case where the victim was too young to ever tell his story? And what does justice even look like here?
There is no justice except exposure, telling the world that this happened and making sure it doesn't happen to somebody else. And that's why you need to have more stories like this, because as crazy as it sounds, as horrible and horrific as it sounds, it happens. People have problems. People have mental problems. People hurt their children. Don't be afraid to say something, even if it's your best friend, your family member. If you think something's wrong, protect that little child. And hearing stories like this should make you think about it and make you remember when you see something. I saw that story. I know these things do happen. I shouldn't ignore the signs, like a bruise on a child's arm, especially if you see it more than once and on different arms and different parts of their body. Say something. Don't be afraid.
Right. Great advice there. This is a story that we will be following closely. Randy, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
In a statement, Franklinton Police Chief Justin Brown said in his over 30 years in law enforcement, he's never experienced a case like this one, and said that it is absolutely heartbreaking. For Law and Crime, I'm Kennedi Walker.